Good morning, Dr. Rao. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Great. Thank you. Thank you. It's brilliant to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this series of Sentientist Conversations. And as we've talked about briefly, it focuses on the two deepest philosophical questions and the ones I think are the most important. What's real and how should we choose what to believe, and what and who matters, the basis of our morality, if you like. And I'm having these conversations with an obvious bias because I'm trying to popularize this very simple philosophy called Sentientism, which suggests that when it comes to what's real, we should take a naturalistic approach using evidence and reason. And when it comes to the moral scope question of who and what matters, that we should focus on sentience, the capacity to have experiences, to suffer, to flourish, as the way we set our moral scope. But I have the privilege of talking to an amazing range of people in these conversations who agree with and disagree with different parts of that philosophy. So it'll be fascinating to understand your own personal philosophical journey and where that's led you to.
Sure.
But before we get to those two deep questions, how would you best introduce yourself for people who don't know of your life and work?
Well, I was raised in India. So I was raised in a Hindu family. And my mother especially was quite religious. So she taught us about rituals and prayers, daily prayers. And she used to go to the temple every week. And we used to actually do prayers every day, I remember, as children.
Which part of India did you grow up in?
I grew up in Chennai, in the south. And then I was going to school and I learned to be an engineer. So I delved into the material world quite a bit. And all along, my mother's philosophy and my parents' philosophy was that God is in charge and you are just an instrument in God's greater design. And as an engineer, you tend to look at things from a very materialistic perspective. Okay, so you're looking at what can be measured, what can be not measured, and what can be deduced from what you measure, and how do you create things that work based on what you're measuring. That's proof that your understanding is correct when something works, right? So I had that training, the engineering training in India. And then I came to the US to work on my graduate studies. And I came to the US because this is where things were happening. Okay? Because I remember being inspired by the moon landing and saying, I want to be in a place where they do things like that.
Yeah, a seminal moment.
I wanted to work in Bell Labs, of all things. Bell Labs was the place where they invented the transistor, they invented the integrated circuit, they invented the solar panels. So that's where things were happening, in my opinion. So anyway, I came to the US, I did my graduate studies, and then I joined Bell Labs, my dream job.
Dream achieved.
Dream achieved, yes. But within a few years, I realized that Bell Labs is no longer the old Bell Labs that it used to be. Because by 1980, I think 82 or 83, it got split up, right? And it was no longer a public utility company, but it was a private company now. So they came around and they asked me, what are you doing for the company? And I said, okay, I'm out.
Yeah.
And I got out and I started my own consulting firm. And we called ourselves Silicon Design Experts. There were a few of us together. And we were working on the internet and high-speed communications and high-speed digital signal processing. So we were working on things like HDTV and video encoding in the beginning. And then we worked on gigabit Ethernet and
all of the things that enable us to have this conversation.
Exactly. So anyway, I worked on gigabit Ethernet and I got it out. We got it on the motherboard at Intel by 2003, and it was on every laptop out there, every computer out there. So I had achieved.
Yeah.
But I wasn't happy. I was thinking about it, saying, wait a minute, I've achieved. It's not what I expected it to be.
Yeah.
And then I started working on 10 gigabit Ethernet, doing the same thing 10 times faster. Maybe that's a challenge. And by that time, it was no longer a collegial group that I was working with for the internet. It had become highly commercialized, and it was cutthroat competition. And people were fighting over which patent gets into the standard, which doesn't get into the standard. And I was getting disillusioned with the whole process. And I came home one day and I switched on the television, and there was Al Gore talking about climate change. And I couldn't keep my eyes off. I was just rooted to my seat saying, my God, if what he's saying is true, if half of what he's saying is true, I'm wasting my time. Okay, so that was the impression I got.
Yeah.
And so I told my wife that, and she said, if you think it's that important, you have the luxury to do it. If you can just go and study it and you tell me what we need to do. So that's what I did. I studied it, and within a couple of months, and told her, we have to close down our company and focus on this full time. This is
wow.
This is going to be my life's work from now on.
Yeah.
And because this was the biggest systems problem around, I consider myself a systems engineer. So I decided to study it, and I wrote to Mr. Gore and I said, how can I help you? And I got trained by him in 2006, November. I was in the second batch that he trained. But during the training, I asked him, if we take all the land that we are currently using for raising animals and return it back to forests, can we not reverse climate change? And he looked at Roy Neal, his chief of staff, and he said, how did this guy get in here? So I realized that he didn't want to talk about it.
Really?
No one wanted to talk about it. So that's when I decided I need to probably look at this independently. I started Climate Healers in 2007. And initially it was just a project to go and change lighting systems in the world. And I called it the Lighting Project to begin with. But very quickly, that business model that I had fell apart. So I decided to call it Climate Healers and focus on the big picture, the systems thinking that needs to go into it. How do you heal the climate? So that's a long answer to your question.
No, it's a great story. Thank you. And there's been so many different threads of your work around climate healers as well. The documentaries you've worked on, the books you've written, broad range of compelling content as well, which many of my listeners and viewers might have seen already. But that's a great introduction to your life story. Thank you. So I guess you've already touched on the first of those two philosophical questions, what's real, and the context of this question about naturalism and supernaturalism. So you grew up in a Hindu family. It would be really interesting to know, I guess, one, whether that way of thinking has changed through your life. I think you're still Hindu now, for example. Is that true? But it would be interesting to know whether that's shifted. And I think I'm also very interested in how that relates to how you think about the physical reality of the world as well. As you said, given your scientific and your engineering focus, it's a really interesting complement of different worldviews. So yeah, both on that sort of religious side, has your thinking shifted at all? And then how does science and that sort of naturalistic way of thinking play alongside that?
When I started working on the environment, that's when I became the most disillusioned about my Hindu background, and what they were teaching me. I thought, how can a God be responsible for doing things like this? I mean,
yeah, if God is in charge, how well is he doing?
Yes. This is poor work, right? If God's in charge, right? And I thought, we are the only species that's a mistake on this planet. If you take human beings out, the planet will be fine. That was the impression I got. Okay, just studying the environment. And I thought there was nothing I could do from a systems perspective either, because I thought we were going to hell in a handbasket. There's nothing I could do about it. And this was around 2009. I went to this forest that's behind me.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's a beautiful place. This used to be a coffee plantation, just coffee bushes 20 years ago. And it turned into a forest in 20 years. And it was a sanctuary started by a couple from New Jersey. Okay. So I went there and I had this sense of perfection. Everything fits beautifully in nature. Okay? Every animal just lives and nature thrives. And so I began to feel that, I felt that sense of perfection in the sanctuary. And then I asked the owners, how did you make this happen? They said, oh, we did nothing. We just bought this coffee plantation. We tore down the fences and gave it back to the animals, and they did everything. They came and dropped new seeds, trees were born, etc. I said, that's it. That's all you have to do. I said, well, we also had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. Okay. And at that point, I felt really small, as if I don't even belong in my own home.
Yeah.
Because I was born in this forest, just 200 kilometers away from where I was standing.
Yeah. You're thinking, am I the problem? Are we the problem?
I thought we were the problem. I thought we were the only species that doesn't belong on Earth. Every other species just belongs exactly as is. And I even remember asking them about this elephant. The elephant was breaking branches of trees. And I said, isn't that elephant destroying your tree? And he said, no, the elephant will stop. And wherever the elephant broke branches of trees, that's where the sunlight will stream and nourish the underbrush. Wherever the elephant walked, that's where new pathways are formed in the forest. So everything the elephant does is in alignment with nature.
Yeah, just seem to fit.
Everything fits, except we don't. So that's the impression I got. And a year later, my granddaughter was born. Okay, and she was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and we were living in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I came to see her when she was a month old. And this was going through my mind. We are the only species that doesn't belong. Okay, so but when I came to see her, I held her in my arms for the first time. I felt as if I was holding humanity in my arms.
Yeah.
Because she's half Asian, 1/4 African, 1/4 American Indian. So I saw all continents in her somehow. It's as if I was holding humanity in my arms. And she looked up at me and she had this knowing smile. It's like, I know what you're thinking. You think I don't belong, but I belong exactly as I am. Okay? And you're a fool. You haven't understood me yet. And I had the same sense of perfection that I had at the sanctuary, okay? That feeling of perfection. So I realized she must belong exactly as she is, and we all must belong exactly as we are. And just like the elephant, when I saw the elephant, I thought the elephant was being destructive. I hadn't understood the elephant at that point. I said, in the same way, I haven't understood our role as a species. Okay. So I said, so I'm going to have to study that. So I came back and I started writing my first book, Carbon Dharma. Because Dharma is about what is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Which is very easy to figure out. Any 5-year-old can tell you what is the right thing to do. Be kind to all life. This is not complicated. Be kind to all life.
Yeah.
And everything will be fine.
It's not a radical or difficult idea.
It's not a radical idea at all. Okay? It's simple stuff, except we haven't coded it in the way we live. We don't live according to that principle. So I wrote Carbon Dharma. I used the analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly. So I said, we are being called to transform from the caterpillar stage to the butterfly stage. And we have been caterpillars so long. We have been just consuming. But I had no idea why were we doing this. Okay. But I wrote, what is the right thing to do? And then I spent 5 years trying to understand what were we doing all along. What is the story of our life? What is the story of our species? Just like the elephant has a story. Elephant belongs in the ecosystem. So what is our story, human beings? How do we belong? And that took me 5 years to figure out, just dropping all the pieces in and figuring out the details. And even though the main idea was staring at me in the face all along. So I wrote Carbon Yoga in 2016 based on that research. And Carbon Yoga, the idea there was, as soon as we acknowledge as a species that we are changing the climate of the planet, we have automatically assumed responsibility for maintaining the stability of that climate. Okay.
Yeah.
So we are the climate regulating species of the planet. Okay. So then I said, why does the planet need a climate regulating species? So I had to figure out, why does the planet... So then I went back and studied, and sure enough, it was staring at me in the face. It's there. The data is there, telling you this is why you need it. Because the sun is a red dwarf. The sun gets hotter and hotter over time. As the sun got hotter and hotter over time, the earth was shedding her greenhouse gas blankets. The CO2 levels kept coming down. And you can see that in the fossil record. The CO2 levels kept coming down, and then it became so low that any small change in the sun's input on the planet was enough to trigger an ice age or a warm period. So it's just half a watt per square meter change in the solar intensity on Earth is enough to trigger an ice age or a warm period. And that's what we were going through over the last 3 million years. Okay. So we had over 100 ice ages in the last 3 million years and warm periods in between. And during that time, Earth spawned us as a species.
Yeah.
Spawned us as a species, put us in an environment of abject terror, because we are a species that doesn't run too fast, doesn't climb trees too, doesn't have claws, doesn't have sharp teeth, doesn't hear too well, doesn't see too well, doesn't smell too well. All our senses have been so diminished, except for our brain. Okay? So she gave us this huge brain and said, oh, now you figure out how to survive.
Yeah. You're sort of decent all-rounder, but with an amazing brain. Good luck.
So we were sitting ducks until we figured out how to harness fire and how to create weapons and how to defend ourselves. Okay. So then we kind of survived in Africa.
Mm.
And then 50,000 years ago, she gave us a partnership with dogs. And so the dogs lent us their sense of smell. Wolves lent us their sense of smell, their sense of hearing. So they became our companions. They helped us identify a predator before the predator could identify us. And then she said, spread out throughout the world. And that's what we did. We spread out throughout the world. And in the current warm period, we started agriculture. Think about this. This is so incredible. Such an incredible story. So we started agriculture. In the process, we chopped down trees. We raised all these animals and we heated up the earth. And we heated up the earth to the point where the earth could not go back to another ice age again. So we kept the temperature constant for 10,000 years. Okay. Through sheer dumb luck, or maybe some design. Okay. Who knows? Then in the last 200 years, we discovered fossil fuels. We dug them up and we started burning them. And in the process, we created all the instruments, all the tools that we need to be a conscious climate regulating species.
Yeah.
Okay. For the last 10,000 years, we were unconscious climate regulating species. Now she's saying, wake up and do it consciously and take care of all life. If you take care of all life, so you stop from being a big predator species, because you're not a predator species, excuse me, and you become a caretaker species, then we can thrive.
Yeah.
So we see that now. So we see this, there's this light that's telling us if you want to thrive, you have to be a caretaker species, a climate regulating caretaker species. If you insist on being a narcissistic predator species, you're going to die.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah. And it's fascinating the way you tell the story. And just to take you back a little bit, it sounds like your faith was at one point shaken because of what you saw. But it doesn't sound like it was broken. It sounds like it was shaken and challenged, but you went back to what you saw as maybe the more fundamental, deeper aspects of your faith, Dharma, Ahimsa, and so on, reconnected with those. And that led you through the story you've just told us. Is that a fair summary? So you still have that religious faith, but it's maybe has a deeper connection to what you see as the core.
To me, my granddaughter brought me back to faith.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, she did.
And it's fascinating because I think the facts of the story you tell, I think I would tell in a very similar way, but where I would tell it really by evolution and just a process that is unfolding that has no purpose until we are able to conceive of purposes. I think you tell the same series of facts, but there is more of a teleology there. There is a sense of agency and direction and intent and purpose and where we're going. But I think the same facts maybe flow through both of those interpretations. It's interesting. And
it's how you tell it, right? Even evolution, if I think about evolution always, life wants to thrive. Okay, so that's the foundation of evolution. Life wants to thrive. And life, it'll increase in complexity as the environment around it challenges it in order to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, where that complexity is a good fit.
And that's, I think, what's happening, because at the inner edge of the habitable zone around the sun, as it became harder and harder to thrive, because an ice age is bad for life. Okay, so life has to concentrate around the equator.
For most of it, certainly,
Yeah. And so she said, okay, I'm going to have to figure out a better way of doing active feedback. I'm an engineer, so I've done active feedback versus passive feedback. And so I know active feedback can be much more powerful. And so that's what we are being tasked with doing. So we have to do this active feedback so that the Earth will never, ever have to go back to another ice age. And we can maintain this temperature. We can be the thermostat species of the planet, so to speak. And we have a purpose now. Just like the elephant has a purpose, we have a purpose. And we just have to now fulfill that purpose, recognizing that we are here to serve the animals, not to go eat them. They're our bosses. We have to report to them saying, I'm sorry, you got this. You had a bad summer. We'll check it out and we'll make sure it gets better next time. So we have to report to the animals, right? That's how we need to be looking at this. We are in service. And so that to me is a story of which can be said in either looking at it as evolution and growing in complexity, or a design that ensures that life thrives.
Yeah. And when you go back to your religious faith, how can I put this? Is that based on, I guess, a naturalistic view of I see the evidence and I reason through it and therefore I choose to maintain my faith? Or is it something distinct for you? Is faith something separate in the religious context from evidence and reason? So, for example, clearly science is deeply important to your life's work and you use evidence and reasoning on a daily basis to do most of what you do. Right. Is your faith something separate, or is it?
It's part of the whole. To me, it's become one and the same. Because the evidence is pointing to me that whatever they were teaching me in the Bhagavad Gita, etc., is actually correct. In the Bhagavad Gita, which is the dialogue between man and God, man goes to God and says, "Why should I fight this battle? Why should I fight the battle of life? You are in charge. You are God, so you take care of the problem." So that's how man approaches God, and God says to him, "How do you think I do it? Through you."
Yeah.
So you get out there and you fight.
You cannot run away from your responsibilities. Yeah.
Exactly. But then at the end, after giving him all this advice as to why he should fight the battle of life, God tells man, "I love you so much that I've set you free even from me, and you're free to choose." So you're free to choose, but the outcome is the same, no matter what you choose, because the outcome has already been settled. Okay? So the way he frames it, and I think that's, to me, that is a certain engineering approach to that. Because as an engineer too, when I start a project, like Gigabit Ethernet, right? When I started Gigabit Ethernet, that it will be done.
That's non-negotiable.
I didn't say, "Oh my God, I don't think I can do it," and then start a project.
It's just a question of how.
Right. It's just a question of how. Yeah. So we always start.
So God as a project manager. The milestone is here. It's up to you.
Yeah, the milestone is here. It will be a thriving planet, whether you like it or not. You choose whether you want to suffer in the process, how much you want to suffer in the process. That's our choice.
How difficult do you want to make it? Yeah,
exactly. For yourself. I mean, if we choose to off ourselves in the process, well, you'll start over. It'll take another few million years. It's not a problem.
Reboot.
Reboot. Exactly.
Well, thank you. That's great. And it leads nicely onto the second big question of the foundations of morality and what matters. And it's a really interesting balance, because for someone like me who's followed I grew up Christian and then became an atheist. And then there's a challenge there of, okay, if you don't have a supernatural belief or a deistic belief, what is the grounding of your morality? And I went through a journey of humanism, secular humanism, and saying, okay, let's take this naturalistic understanding of the world, but then let's layer on a compassion for all humanity. And in a way, sentientism takes it to that next level of humans aren't the only beings that can suffer. So let's have a compassion for all sentient beings. So I guess that's the path I've followed to linking that naturalism through to a moral stance. But it's fascinating for people who have a religious worldview, because there's still many different choices of how you can frame morality in a more religious worldview as well. I'm really interested in how you see that picture, because from what you've said already, you might see the foundation of your morality as deity or fulfilling that end goal, or it might also have elements of compassion for the other entities and the life around us as well. And I should let you talk, but I'm really interested in, what do you see as the basis of your morality and your worldview, given what you've laid out? What defines what is good and bad morally or ethically for you?
See, one of the things, I studied the Bhagavad Gita after my granddaughter was born. I mean, I went through it.
You went back.
I went back and went through it with a fine-tooth comb, so to understand my role. And there is a beautiful story in the Bhagavad that is referred to in the Bhagavad Gita. He doesn't tell the story, but he refers to that story. And then I went and looked up that story. And to me, it's a story that explains the knowledge tree story in the Bible. Okay. So the knowledge tree story in the Bible is that Adam and Eve basically got tempted by the fruit of the tree and then got banished from Eden. So you're out of Eden, right? The equivalent story in the Hindu pantheon of stories is a fig tree, not an apple tree.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a wishing tree. Okay. It's a wishing tree. It's not a knowledge tree. It's a wishing tree. And the story begins with children playing with sticks and stones and rag dolls on the floor of their hut in the middle of the forest. And their uncle comes to visit them. And their uncle says, "Why are you playing with sticks and stones when the cosmic fig tree is right outside your hut? Go out and wish for anything you want under the tree and it will give it to you. Then you can be playing with real toys instead of these trifles." The children don't believe him. How can there be a tree like this? So they wait until the uncle leaves. And then they rush to the tree and they start wishing. They wish for sweets and they get them. And they gorge on the sweets and they get stomachache. They wish for toys and they get them. They play with the toys and they get bored. Then they wish for fancier toys and that leads to greater boredom. So there was something about this tree that they did not understand. It grants you what you wish for, and along with it comes the exact opposite. But the children didn't know that. All they knew is that they couldn't stop wishing under the tree. And the more they wished, the more miserable they were.
Yeah.
Okay. Then they get to be young men and women. And now they're wishing for what young men and women wish for. The 4 main fruits of the tree were sex, fame, money, and power. Yeah. And with each comes its opposite. And the result was more misery and suffering for the young men and women. Then they get to be old men and women. And they congregate under the tree in 3 different groups. The first group says, "We were so happy when we didn't know about this tree. It has all been a hoax and a farce." And the story says they were fools, but they hadn't understood the tree. The second group says, "You must have been wishing for all the wrong things. If you could go back and wish for different things, I'm sure we'd have been a lot happier." And they were bigger fools, for they understood less than nothing about this tree. And the third group was the most foolish of the lot, but they come under the tree and they say, "We are so miserable, we wish we were dead." And the tree grants them the wish. And they're immediately reborn underneath the same tree. Because the tree always grants wishes in dualities. Nothing comes separate by itself, because that's how the universe is built.
A balance.
The balance. And then the story doesn't stop there. It goes on to talk about this lame child who was watching all this from inside the window of the hut. Because every group was foolish, right? So this lame child was watching all this from inside the window of the hut. And he saw how the tree was making everybody miserable. He also wanted to go out and wish for a good leg so he could walk. But there was such a crowd of people that they pushed him away. So he couldn't get through. So he stood there and he watched and he saw the tree was making everybody miserable. The people who were wishing were miserable. People who were trying to get to the tree were miserable. All the animals were suffering because of all the wishing. And then he had a brilliant flash of insight. He understood the tree. And with that understanding, he lost the desire to wish. He began to feel a well of compassion come from within him for all the suffering under the tree and lost the desire to wish. He became detached from the tree. And with that combination of compassion and detachment, he was the happiest of the lot. So that's where the story ends.
Yeah.
Now, we have the Upanishads, which explain to you what they taught you in the stories, right, in the Vedas. So in one of the Upanishads, they say that the wishing child and the watching child are inside each one of us. It's up to us to figure out who we want to be in touch with. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is the purpose of meditation, according to that. The purpose of meditation is to get in touch with your watching child and to observe your own wishing child and be compassionate and detached from your wishing child.
Yeah.
So stay with your watching child. So that's the story of the Bhagavad Gita as well, because the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is asking Krishna, why should I wish under the tree? Okay, I'll just sit here and meditate upon you and I'll be perfectly happy. Krishna said he won't be happy because he'll be thinking, what is Duryodhana doing? You won't be able to meditate, okay, because you're stuck in this. And so he taught him how to wish. That's the whole of the Bhagavad Gita, is how do you wish under the tree? He said, if you go under the tree and you wish for the benefit of everyone else, and he said, I don't want anything from this tree for myself. You become detached from the tree. Then you'll be perfectly happy wishing under the tree, and everyone will be happy because of your wishing. Okay, so in that sense, it is telling you how to lead your life, or teaching you how to lead your life. Wish for the benefit of everyone else around you.
Yeah.
And as a species, we should be wishing for the benefit of every other species around us, because we are the ones who have access to this tree. This knowledge tree was given to us.
Yeah.
And so we need to be wishing for the benefit of every other species and not for ourselves. So that's when I understood the story in the Bible. Because the Bible also, it's the same moral. It's being taught to us. If you eat the fruit of the tree yourself, you're going to be banished from Eden. If you use the fruit of the tree for the benefit of everyone else, you will still be in Eden. Okay.
Yeah.
That is the transformation that we need to make now. It's about transitioning from a system where we are grabbing for ourselves to a system where you're serving others.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because there are some people with a religious worldview who ultimately will put obedience to the deity at the root. So you can look at the story of Abraham and Isaac, for example, and that's one classic test where the right thing to do is to follow God's word, even if it involves killing your own son. So in a sense, that is a different way of thinking, right? That's saying obedience first, everything else afterwards. And the way you frame that story, I'm sure there are themes of obedience to the deity or deities and playing a role in a sort of teleological sense with the world. But you very much put compassion at the center of morality in the way you framed that. And it's something I accord with in a very rich sense myself. I summarize this sentientism thing as evidence, reason, and compassion for all sentient beings. And in a way, that's a really interesting question, because compassion, I think, is a very simple thing. You can get to it intellectually, you can get to it emotionally, you can get to it from a naturalistic way of thinking or from a religious or a supernatural way of thinking. And I think almost everybody has some compassion. The problem is it's often constrained or conditional. And so I guess that's another question I'd like to put to you is, how did you go through that journey of thinking about which entities warrant compassion? Because there's a very strong sense I get from you from an early stage that you care about the entire planet, the ecosystem, and in a very broad sense. But when you're talking about compassion specifically, that seems to be something that is a concern for us and other animals. How did you go through that journey, starting out with a more immediate compassion and then thinking more expansively about non-human animals that we share the planet with?
I was always raised in the Ahimsa tradition. So it's non-violence to all beings. But I used to consume dairy. Right. So, and I was told, hey, we don't really hurt the cow. We only take the excess milk after the cow is finished. So it's just it's a relationship between us and our mother cow.
Yeah.
Okay? So the cow is our mother. So that's how we treat her.
Yeah.
And I bought into that story. But when I came to the US, I realized that the cows were treated very badly. Okay? But then I said, we don't have to do it this way. It could have been done better. It's just that people here are more profit-oriented, whatever. So I had all these justifications going on in my mind as to why I can continue consuming these things. And it is always, we do it better in India. So there is a better way to do this. And then I went to India in 2008 and I saw what was happening. And I had this sense of shame, this guilt. At first, it was a sense of shame that I had been fooling myself, that I'd been lying to myself. Okay? Because I saw what was happening in the forests, how the old cows were walking around eating anything green that was growing on the ground. And the forest was literally dying in front of my eyes. And I realized it was my consumption of dairy that was causing that forest to die. And because there is nothing for the deer to eat, the deer dies. When the deer dies, the tiger dies. So the entire ecosystem is dependent on the food and on the food availability at the bottom. And I was asking my cows to go and eat all that food. Yeah. And especially because I didn't want to kill the cows, these were old cows walking around eating the grass.
Yeah.
So I realized that as a dairy consumer, I was actually causing more of an impact than someone who was also consuming some beef. So that was it. I had this sense of shame, and I went vegan on the spot. Okay, went vegan on the spot, and then a month later, within a week, I had this huge sense of guilt lift off my shoulders when I realized I can do this. At first, I thought maybe I'll be tempted to eat my yogurt rice again or whatever, that I'm going to fall off the wagon, so to speak. Then once I realized I could do this, I had this huge sense of guilt lift off my shoulders. And then I realized that guilt I had been carrying almost all my life. Because as a child, I had overheard my grandmother talking to my grandfather. And my grandmother was telling my grandfather that this particular calf was drinking too much. Is not leaving enough milk for the children. And what do? And my grandfather told my grandmother, don't let him drink to his fill, pull him away after 10 minutes. And I knew as a child that there was something wrong going on. But I tried to put it away in the back of my mind and forget about it.
Yeah.
But I think I never really did. I had that guilt all along. And that could have been the reason why I had arthritis and sinus problems and all kinds of issues that went away as soon as I went vegan. Okay. So then I realized that the transformation is a journey through opening the chakras. It's literally the same thing.
Yeah.
So you begin with the fear of the transformation. You have to overcome the fear. That's the base chakra. Then comes the guilt, then the shame, then the grief, then the lies, then the delusions, and then the attachments. Those are the 7 chakras.
Yeah, the levels you work through. Yeah.
The levels you work through. And so once you are not attached to that product anymore, then you're free of it. Then you become free. And when you free yourself from any such desire, every desire, then you become enlightened. And what does enlightened mean? It just means that you're seeing things as they are. Right? Seeing things as they are and not as you have been conditioned.
Yeah. Right. And in a way, it almost echoes my naturalistic way of thinking. Again, we have biases and social norms and guilt and shame, lies, and all these things built up. And we're trying to find a clear way through to, a genuine understanding. Yeah.
So that's what yoga is about. Yoga is about overcoming opening those 7 chakras. If you look at any photograph of Krishna, Lord Krishna, he's playing a flute. And the flute has 7 holes. So those are 7 open chakras. And through that, he can play beautiful music. So as soon as you open all your chakras, he can play beautiful music through you. That's the symbolism of that flute playing.
I'm fascinated by the interplay between the Hindu culture and worldview and the relationship with non-human animals, because again, I think it's your compassion that makes the difference there. Because I had a fascinating conversation with one of my previous guests, Aditya Prakash, and he was talking about the pure veg philosophy, how that links in with caste concepts, sometimes a concept of purity, often concepts of sacredness and worship, which aren't necessarily about compassion, for example, the cows. And I think, again, there's a difference there between one motivation that leads you to a particular sort of diet and a compassionate one that actually has some sense of these cows are beings in their own right that have perspectives, their suffering matters, and it can lead you to a slightly different place, even though there can be quite a lot of overlap. And I know that's one of the things you've done quite a lot of work on, and your focus on ahimsa and dharma. I guess a frustration that you and I share is that it seems that most of the people in the world for whom those are central parts of their worldviews, whether those flow through Hinduism or Jainism or Buddhism or many of the other religions to which they are part, haven't yet got on the journey you've gone on, and they seem to have a sort of partial application of ahimsa or a constrained compassion. What's your sense of how, because in a way, sentientism I'm casting is a quite naturalistic way of thinking, but I clearly have common cause with everybody who's working within communities that have a more religious focus to try and get us to more a more compassionate place. What's your thinking about how those dynamics can play out in religious communities?
I tell my Hindu audience or my Jain audience, when I talk to them, I said, yeah, you were right. We were right that the cow is our mother. The cow has been our mother. And for 10,000 years, she has been our mother. And now she's just saying, grow up.
Yeah. The weaning period is over. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the weaning period. Okay, you're done. I'm done with feeding you. It's time for you to grow up and take on your responsibility as the climate regulating caretaker species of the planet. Okay? That's your role. And she helped us along, and she was a co-creator of this stabilized climate because she was emitting methane. She was emitting all these things to keep the planet warm.
But now.
Until now. And now, of course, it's getting hotter. And she's saying, okay, now that it's getting hotter, don't you see what you're doing? So wake up and, stop drinking my milk. Stop eating me. So that's the message she's trying to tell us. So I tell people, it's about us to waking up to our true nature and our true purpose and our sense of belonging in the ecosystems of the world. We belong. Yeah. We belong exactly as we are. And this is the gift, the amazing gift that my granddaughter gave me. Okay, the understanding of that purpose.
Yeah, thank you.
And
one challenge with many people, and I've spoken to some of them, who have a very expansive moral scope. So they will look at, for example, the forest behind you and think of the planet as Gaia, and think of it, in a very broad systemic way. And they have a deep moral appreciation for, the environment as a whole, whether or not the components of it are living. They care about rocks and rivers and trees and ecosystems and mountains. Right. But sometimes they will frame that very broad, expansive moral consideration, and they will say, we are all connected, we are all one, in a sense. We have our role to play as part of the cycle of life. Life consumes life, as a lion eats the antelope. And as humans in that ecosystem, we also should play our part. So I can have my bacon sandwich and my chicken nuggets. Right. And for me, again, it's compassion that cuts through that and says, you're causing needless suffering. But in your way of thinking, how do you challenge that response? Because your stance is that we are a caretaker that should have compassion for all of the other really sentient beings. And their stance is, no, that's denying nature in a way. Right. We can be a predator too,
Right. Well, yeah. So I addressed that by looking at the science of it and the engineering of it. There is no valid ecosystem in which the predator species has 10 times the biomass of all its prey. You're going to die if you think
totally
that's
out of balance. Yeah,
it's totally out of balance. So I say that even if you believe you're a predator species, which clearly we are not, because we don't salivate at the sight of a dead animal. How would you eat a dead corpse? Doesn't that make you feel queasy thinking about eating a dead corpse? But that's what you're eating when you eat that. And that's one thing. But aside from that, just looking at the science and the engineering of it, I say to people, temporarily give it up until we solve the balance problem, because wild animals are dying. They're dying. They're already 80% gone compared to 1970 levels. Okay?
Yeah.
So are we going to just wake up one day when 100% of them are gone? And you think there is a valid ecosystem with just human beings and cockroaches? No. If it comes to that pass, Mother Nature is going to start over. So you're going to be gone too. And is that what you want to do to your children and grandchildren?
Yeah, it's another angle of the argument, isn't it? It's over and above feeling a compassion for those beings that are our victims. It's thinking in that systemic way about even us needing a long-term place to live that will sustain ourselves too. So it's another angle. And there's one other, before we move on to this question of thinking about implications for the future, there's one other moral question that is tricky for many vegans and many in the animal advocacy movement as well. And you've touched on it to some degree, but it is that of the suffering of wild animals. Mm-hmm. Not just through our own destruction of their habitats, but actually the suffering that goes on even in the beautiful forest behind you. So there is this very strong pull, and I feel it too, to look at a natural landscape unimpeded by humans. It's found a balance. Evolution is working. There is this incredible ability of nature to find sustainable balances in environments that work. But even in those sort of optimized pure, perfect, aesthetically pleasing wild environments, there is enormous suffering of wild animals going on as well. And personally, I see that. I don't know necessarily what the answer to that is. There may not be easy answers, but I think it's important not to withdraw our moral consideration for those beings because they're sentient and they suffer too. What's your sense of that tricky challenge of sort of the ethics of wild animal suffering and how that plays into your worldview?
See, in the larger picture, there is suffering. In life does have suffering. This is what the Buddha said, right? So that life is about suffering. Some animals are going to get killed by other animals because they are weak. So this is how nature culls out its weaklings and creates an environment where only the strong thrive, so to speak. But that's how nature creates its balance. Now, if you say, I want to minimize suffering and therefore I'm going to kill everything off, then there's no suffering.
That's one radical option, yeah.
I say, wait a minute, you're going to some kind of a local minimum that's going to be not good for you either. Ultimately, life finds a balance where life thrives. Okay? Wild animals don't kill each other just for fun. Okay? They don't kill each other unnecessarily. So for the most part, they find their own balance. And like this, just like the elephant stopped cutting down the branches of trees at a certain point. Okay? In the same way, we are being called to stop the destruction of the forest, the killing of the wild animals, and eating all these domesticated animals who are suffering tremendously in these horrible facilities that we have created, this killing machine that we have created. Okay, and we are being called to rethink that because we know exactly where that's headed if we continue along that path.
Yeah.
I mean, we can predict that, so we know where it's going to head.
And I think this is one theme that will play through as we talk about, how to make the future better, is because it seems that you and I think, have very different worldviews in one sense, but at the same time, we can overlap very strongly on many of our conclusions. And I think we'll find that's true of different types of motivations as well, whether your motivation is a universal compassion for all sentient beings, or whether it's about creating a sustainable environment for humans, or whether it's maybe even about human health. Almost whatever your motivation is, quite often you can find a common answer and a win-win-win.
Right.
But yeah, so I do find that encouraging. It doesn't require, we can still have an enormous diversity of different ways of thinking, but often we can still find ourselves in a similar place in terms of what we need to do next.
This is why I think of nature as the most perfect system design ever.
Yeah. And I think that's one area where we do differ, because I see nature as completely amoral. I think nature just doesn't care. Right? And that's why there is so much suffering in the wild with our strategists that have many thousands of offspring that die young from starvation or predation. Nature, I think, can be beautiful and rich and wondrous, but is also vicious and brutal and, and deeply unpleasant when you take a compassionate worldview. So there are different ways of thinking about the challenge. And I guess that's partly why, for me, compassion for other sentient individuals is the foundation. And I see nature as, or having a good, positive ecosystem as valuable because it creates a great place for sentient beings to exist, rather than seeing nature as an end in itself, because I think, nature can be pretty amoral. So.
Yeah, to me, now when I say nature is the most perfect system design ever, I see it as from a systems engineering perspective, right? Yeah, where the waste from one becomes the food for another. There is nothing that's left aside, right? So everything is used. Everything is part of this larger picture, and you see everything thriving. When you leave it alone, it thrives. And so maximization of life. It is optimized for the maximization of the thriving of life. And I see us also being part of the same larger picture. Yeah. As we assume our true role as the climate regulating caretaker species of the planet, and which we are going to be forced to do anyway, as we take on that role, we are going to see that we are part of this thriving of life. The life thrives no matter what the environment around it is. Okay, it's trying to thrive as much as possible. So even at the inner edge of the habitable zone, she found a way to thrive for another billion years, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who knows what's going to happen after that,
Yeah, we'll see if we keep going for another one. So
Yes.
So if we bring that all together, I guess those are the two deep questions I'm fascinated to. It's great to hear your story about what's real and what matters. And the final question really is, how can we make the future better? How do you think about that, both in terms of maybe a utopian end state we can get to? You've talked about, can we make a vegan world by 2026? And what do you see as the primary challenges in getting towards it?
Yeah, see, it is recognizing that we were one family.
Yeah.
And this is what science is now telling us too, looking back at the fossil record.
We're all in the same family tree, ultimately. Yeah.
Yeah, we are all in the same family tree, to begin with. And then we dispersed throughout the earth 50,000, 100,000 years ago. And we formed all these clans and stuff. But overall, now we are coming together as the same family.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're on the same boat, whether we like it or not.
Exactly. And so we come together and we say, we have to be honest with each other. We have to treat each other as you would treat any family member, love each other and take care of each other, no matter where we were born, because we are part of the same family. In fact, my granddaughter takes it even further. She says all the animals are her family, all the birds are her family, all the insects are her family. For her, the idea that the whole universe is one family is visceral for her.
Yeah. She feels
because
that.
She asked me about
that connection.
She asked me about evolution when she was 5 years old, and I explained to her about evolution, and that became like visceral for her. Okay, because the way I explained evolution was, I said, imagine that you're standing on the street and you're holding your mother by your hand, and you ask your mother to bring her mother to stand by her side, and so on. So you create a long line of mothers on this side of the street. And on the other side of the street, you do the same thing. You ask a chimpanzee to do the same thing with her mother and her grandmother and so on. I said, by the time these two lines go from Phoenix to Tucson, about 200, 150 miles, they would merge.
Yeah.
Both lines are going to say, that's my mother too. Immediately, she just sat up in bed and she said, what? Animals are my family?
Yeah.
And then she started connecting and she said, why are people eating my family? And she started bawling. Okay, people are eating my family, make them stop. And I realized I had created a world full of monsters for my granddaughter, because she's now seeing this so viscerally. And so I told her, this is what I do. That's my job. And she said, this is your job? This is your job? You haven't done your job.
Why aren't you finished?
Yes. She said, when are you going to do your job?
She has high expectations of her grandfather.
And I blurted out at that point, I better do it by 2026, otherwise we are all in big trouble. And so she asked me to promise her that. And she asked me for a pinky promise. And so that's how the Vegan World 2026 project was born. Because once she told me you can never ever break a pinky promise, I realized I had made a very serious promise to a young girl.
Yeah.
And I better do my darndest to keep it.
Yeah, serious ambition.
Yeah. So that's how it started, But to me, now it is inevitable it's going to happen. Because we have no choice. This is it.
We'll be forced to go that direction. And it seems that there are some problems where the answer is difficult. It's challenging. It's technically difficult. We don't have the intellect to understand it. This doesn't seem like one of those problems. It seems like one of those problems where the answers are actually pretty obvious. And and actually, every human, I think, has the raw material, this sense of compassion, this sense of caring about the planet, that we should be able to work on. Almost every one of the 7.8 billion people shares that in some way. Yet there's such a gulf, which to me feels like it's really mostly about social norms. It's about it's an unpleasant term, but the indoctrination we are all subject to through parents and society and school and marketing and everything else that we grow up. And in that context, I guess that's what Climate Healers, not much of your other work and your documentaries and your writing is trying to work against, is to try and break down and challenge those social norms. What's your sense of, because I share your optimism that there's an inevitability, right? The human species, we struggle to anticipate, but once we're forced into a crisis, we can change quite quickly. So I do think we will get to the right place. But what's your sense about the best way of making that happen? And I'm particularly interested in your experiences of the challenges in a place like the US, which has a particular, dizzying variety of social norms and behaviors and industrial practices, and the challenges of somewhere like India, which has a very different context, ethically, worldviews, industry starting points.
Right.
That's a crazily long question. How can we drive these social norms faster in those two contexts?
When I look at it as something that's inevitable, that's going to have to happen, that's going to happen, I tell people in India, and as you said, everyone says, I would never deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily. Everyone says that,
yeah.
right? So then it's about saying, okay, how are you parsing that? Because ultimately, we all think we are good people, okay? So we all think in alignment with that. So you ask, how are you parsing that? Are you saying the animal is not innocent and deserves to be, maybe it's past karma, so it deserves all that suffering because of its past karma? Is that how you're parsing it? Or are you saying that I didn't do it deliberately, someone else did it, and therefore I can eat because someone else did the work for me? So how are you parsing it, right? Or are you saying it's necessary?
Yeah.
Because the question I ask is, would you deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily? And everyone says no.
Yeah.
Okay. So some people think it's necessary because, where would I get my protein otherwise? The usual nonsense.
Yeah.
The protein myth that we have been indoctrinated into, which I found in my granddaughter's 5th grade textbook. Okay. So they put it in the textbook.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the kinds of lies we tell our children. Okay? And so we have a system that's built on lies and deceptions and marketing, and where money is being made of death, disease, and destruction. Death for the animals, diseases for human beings, and destruction for the planet.
Yeah.
That's how money is being made. So this is why I say you have to change the whole game of money, right? So you have to start over in that sense, right? You have to create a new game that codes our true values, our values. As we said, even they said the same values, okay?
Yeah, it's almost
not like I'm doing something any different.
We won the moral argument already, really.
Exactly. And as you point out, it's not a complicated transformation from an engineering perspective, because 85% of the food we eat is already plant-based.
Yeah.
Okay. Only 15%, 12% comes from land animals and 3% comes from sea animals. And in terms of protein also, 63% of the protein we eat is already plant-based. 82% of the calories we eat is already plant-based. So it's about replacing 15% of your food by weight, 18% of calories, and 37% of the protein. We can easily do that with plant-based alternatives. So you look at everything and you say, can you not make that plant-based? Of course you can. So from a feasibility perspective, it's very easy. But what we are facing, in my opinion, is, in my analysis, is that we have built our civilization on 2 false axioms. Just when we thought that the sun goes around the earth, we had a limited vision of the world, right? Because when you think the sun goes around the earth, which by the way was in the West, people have already figured out the other way a long time ago in other places, because they were doing astrology based on, predicting where the planets are going to be. So in the West, it was Galileo who had to be thrown in jail before he insisted, because he was insisting that the earth goes around the sun and not the other way around. And until that happened, the West could not have started the scientific revolution. Okay. And it's through the scientific revolution that the West gained ascendance over all people, because the West was focused on using their knowledge for weapons of war, for conquest. Because that's what happened to the family branch that went to cold climates. They had to survive, right? So they had to fight to survive. And with the family branch that went to warm climates found it easier to thrive. So it didn't really matter whether they had sophisticated weapons or not. Okay. So this is how those who had the most sophisticated weapons eventually conquered the whole world and colonized the whole world. And that has become the civilization that we are in right now. And it's based on 2 foundational false axioms. The false axiom of consumerism, that the pursuit of happiness is best accomplished by stoking and satisfying a never-ending series of desires in human beings. This is what I call the greed is good rule.
Yeah, and if you've sated your desires, it's time to add some more.
Add some more, exactly. And the second is the false axiom of supremacism, that life is a competitive game in which those who have gained an advantage may possess, enslave, and exploit, animals, nature, and the disadvantaged for their pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. And
these two axioms,
and in a way, that's the only path to happiness, success, well-being is to subjugate. Yeah.
Subjugate. Yeah. So those two axioms are driving the civilization. They're driving the game that we're playing, the game of money that we're playing. Okay. And the economic system that we are in, political system that we are in, are all based on these two axioms. And so we have created two machines to implement these axioms. The burning machine for the axiom of consumerism and the killing machine for the axiom of supremacism. Okay. So you can never get to a thriving, sustainable civilization until you overturn these two false axioms. So we are in a double Galileo moment in human history. It's a double Galileo moment, twice. You have to do two of them, not just one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we may have to go to jail twice, just like Galileo had to go to jail once.
It's a serious challenge. And one of the difficulties is if it feels like we need a complete and total revolution of our entire system for us to succeed, that can feel almost too unachievable. But I guess this is the balance. Some people will say we need a total and utter revolution. Our current systems are rotten. We need to rip them up and start again. And that can lead you to thoughts about radically different economic systems or degrowth or various other approaches. Other people will say, no, yes, there are deep problems with the way we run things now, but we can adapt or change or shift values in a more moderate way. What's your sense? Does it need to be totally radical, or is there another path as well, or both?
It's the end goal has to be totally radical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. The end goal has to be totally radical, but the path to it can take the old and turn it into the new. Okay. Yeah. So I think of it as a dam. It's a dam that is holding back the water of compassion. It's a well of compassion. It's being held up by this dam, and we are all punching holes in the dam. Okay, we're punching holes in the dam. Now it's our job to build the pathway or the river that the dam is going to burst into. Okay, to reach the ocean that it's going to reach. So I say at some point, this dam is going to burst. This old way of doing is going to fail. Every Ponzi scheme eventually collapses.
Yeah.
And what we are doing right now is a Ponzi scheme. It's an outright Ponzi scheme. We are stealing from the poor to enrich the rich. Let's be honest about this, okay? So all the money I have in the bank came on the backs of some poor laborer somewhere, because that's the economic system. We have legalized theft of labor. Okay? We have legalized the theft of other people's work. So I did an example, and I went and bought this bag of rice in the supermarket, and I paid $2 for that bag of rice. And then I went to the village where the rice was grown, and I found out that the woman who grew it got 5 cents.
Yeah.
Okay. That is the economic system we have. And to me, everyone who took the $1.95 from her stole from her. Okay, so to me, it's legalized stealing. On the way down, we do say, if I give $2 in charity to an organization, I expect $1.80, $1.90 to go to the recipient. So we are saying, make sure that you're only taking 10 cents or 20 cents, 10% to 5% siphoning off.
Yeah.
Right? Clearly, we can do that on the way up too, but we chose not to. Because that's how we have been enriching ourselves.
So the value isn't flowing in line with the contribution,
Absolutely. So to me, it is about creating a system in which everyone feels like they're not exploited, that they all feel like they belong because they are part of the same family. We're all part of the same family, right? So that's the end goal. The end goal has to be utopian. I never start with an end goal, even in any engineering project to start it. I'm not going to say, I'm going to put 10 bugs in it. No. The bugs are there is because inadvertently it came. It's not because I intended to put it in there.
Yeah, you start with a vision.
You start with a vision that's ideal. Of course you do. And then you say, okay, how do we create that? So It's just if you tell Sir Isaac Newton, hey, every 6th day, pretend that the sun goes around the earth. You have to abandon everything you've done and pretend that the sun goes around the earth. He's going to say, go away. It doesn't make any sense. Once you are out of this, once you've seen that the axioms are false, you're out of it. So you have to say, what can we build with the correct axioms? What are the correct axioms? The true axiom of inner peace, which is that the pursuit of happiness is best accomplished by looking for it within ourselves. And the second is the true axiom of unity, that all life is one family in which we each bring our unique skills to give all we can, receive all we need, and become all we are, which is what Shelley Ostrov calls the vitality code. So I say that you have to build a system on the correct axioms, and you build your utopia on the correct axioms, okay? And then show how you can get from here to there. So those are the two things we are working on. One is, what is the new system? And then what is the transition from the old to the new? Yeah. And how can we play 2 games simultaneously? So we play games, right? So even the games we play, think of all the sports we play, right? So cricket or football or whatever. We are taking the ball that's made from the skin of an animal and we are batting it around in order to show them how much more powerful we are compared to them. And then we are saying, who is better than who? So it's a competitive finite game. So you always play for competitive finite games in the system, because ultimately we're looking for the one winner, and all the rest are losers. They have to go away. And there is only one endpoint to such game playing: one sole winner, and the rest are all dead. And that's not what you want. Okay, so we need to be playing collaborative, infinite games.
And I guess that's this sort of strange balance we see, because on the one hand, evolution and nature drives a very competitive structure. It is one of survival and it can be brutal. But at the same time, the evolutionary benefit of collaboration and cooperation is there for all to see. And humans didn't invent that either, right? Collaboration and cooperation and compassion predate humans and exist in many non-human species as well. So there's that perennial balance between the sort of competitive win or die drive and then this capacity in the same system to cooperate and collaborate and to, in a way, break out of that evolutionary drive in a sense, because we're, as you say, we're deciding that the propagation of genes is not the ultimate end goal here. We have broken out of that system and decided to put our own sentience, our own quality of experience, our own inner peace, as you say, as, if you like, a more central direct value. That's more important to me than propagating my genes maximally. And by a sense of universal compassion for all of the other sentient beings that have a perspective, that unity you mentioned, that's an intellectual and emotional commitment to cooperation that goes above and beyond, what I guess the evolutionary kit bag we've been gifted in the first place. So it's interesting how these things link up.
You see, we have been given this gift, this incredible gift as a species, because every species has fear and love, right?
Yeah.
Fear to avoid predators and love to take care of their young. So fear and love is this duality, that same duality that I was talking about in the tree. So you have this duality. We were born in an environment of abject fear. And then we have now reached a stage where we are the most powerful species on the planet. We have no one to fear except ourselves. Except fear itself, right? So then now you can afford to create a system based on love. You don't have to create a system. You don't have to play the same fear-based game as to who's the survivor, who's the winner. You don't have that anymore because those guys are all gone. Those days are all gone. So you're the most powerful species on the planet, and so now you can say, now I can afford to be based on love. You can create a system based on love. And I say, people say, then the tiger is going to come and eat you, when you're walking down the road. I said, if Google can monitor 7 billion people and know exactly what you're thinking, Google can certainly turn its cameras around and start monitoring 100,000 tigers. And tell you exactly where they are. In fact, let them do that job instead of monitoring me. What the heck are they monitoring me for?
Yeah. I love the way you put that. We've got to beyond the point now where we don't have to fear anything but ourselves. We have no excuse, but we have no excuse for being aggressive and subjugating anymore. We've gone beyond that stage. And there's fascinating work that people are doing around existential and catastrophic risks, right? So they're thinking very expansively and long term about what might even bring humanity or sentientity to an end. And there are some things which aren't human caused, right? Supervolcanoes, asteroid impact, but most of the most serious risks are absolutely ourselves, right? It's about, biotechnology, or it's about artificial intelligence out of control, or it's about nuclear threats, or most of the challenges, as these very brilliant analytical people think it through it all, are like, they're pointing their fingers at us. And I think you're right. We can seize on that opportunity, recognize we're not in this desperate sort of fight to win state. We can now be more expansive and take on some of the responsibilities that go with our enormous power. So here's hoping we recognize that fast enough and drive the change.
Yeah, we will. To me, the younger generation is already seeing that. It's hard, it's easier to convince them. And so they are the agents of change. Any new transformation happens from the young, right? So they are going to transform first or transform faster, which is already happening in the vegan movement. You see, it's mostly young women. I mean, we need to follow the women now. It's about time we say, enough of this, and I'm just gonna listen to grandmothers, listen to vegan grandmothers, vegan women, and that's where I am at. As far as the political, how would you manage this political? I said, let the grandmothers tell me what to do. And it's not, that's to me is nothing, right? How do you make decisions like that? All I want to do is I want to create a system where I can show that you can actually implement. All men are created equal. All beings are created equal. You can implement that. You can implement that. We have been given the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We can actually implement that.
And it's
not just say it, but actually do it.
There's a lot of saying things but not doing at the moment, as we know. And it's encouraging that even old guys like you and me can change our minds and can try to be better. But I think you're right. We're probably better led by the vegan grandmothers and by your granddaughter as well. But in that context, and thank you so much for the conversation and for all of your amazing work trying to shift the recalcitrant 7.8 billion humans in a more compassionate direction. Are there any other things you'd like to lay into the conversation? I want to respect your time. I just wanted to say that this is how it is meant to be, because in any species you have, and this again is something that Susan Pitkin taught me. Everything I do, I've been taught by others. Ultimately, I'm just a sponge, absorb what I learn from others. So Susan Pitkin told me that in any species, you have the explorers who go out and try new things, like the vegans, right? And then you have the conservatives who stick to what they know. And you need both in any species, because if everyone always follows the explorers, that species is going to die out. Because the explorers could be doing something silly. So you need both for the species to thrive. And sometimes the explorers find something new that they stick to. And then they say, hey, it's actually much better out here. You are healthier. You don't have to be conflicted internally. Spiritually, you will be in alignment. Mentally, you'll be much clearer. Physically, you'll be in much better shape. So then more and more people join. More and more of the species joins the explorers. And then eventually that becomes the new normal. Then there is this tremendous rush to join the new. Okay. And that's how exponential transformations happen. And it feels like we're on the brink of that rush.
Exactly. To me, all transformations are really, the transformations that you remember are all exponential transformations. It's like something happened and then life changed. And so we have seen so many such transformations in our lives. I remember when I was working on Gigabit Ethernet, people said, who's going to use that? Do you think it'll even work? And 7 years later, I overheard someone say, I cannot live without it. And I said, wait a minute, you're the one who told me it cannot be done. And it just, once we get on the other side, it's impossible to look back and say, oh, wow, what were we doing back there? And I think we are in the same situation now. This is the greatest transformation in human history that we are undergoing. The greatest transformation in human history, from all these fear-based systems that we have been in to a love-based system.
Yeah, from the caterpillar to the butterfly. Yeah,
from the caterpillar to the butterfly. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And who wouldn't want to be part of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
well, it's an inspiring vision. And I find it really heartening that even though as we said, we have in a way very different foundations to our worldviews, I think there's a lot of overlap in our vision for the future and where we can get to. And compassion is absolutely at its heart. So thank you for all your work. What's the best way of people following you, learning more about your work, watching your documentaries, reading your book, following Climate Healers?
Climate Healers has got everything, including my books.
Great.
All the text is there, so you don't have to buy it if you don't want to. Just read it. For me, everything I do is open source. I'm just giving it away, saying you can even take it and do what you want with it. Documentaries. So as you pointed out, we've done, I think now I'm on the 10th documentary we're doing together.
Wow. Yeah.
So A Prayer for Compassion is a documentary that I would highly recommend to your viewers because, like you said, it looks at compassion from every angle, from every religious angle, and it finds it, including from the spiritual but not religious angle. And you'll find that compassion is at the core. And we have convergences every 3 months. And so we are meeting this weekend, October 23rd and 24th, where we spend a weekend just going through what we have been doing and listening to newer ideas and figuring out how we are going to build that new system and how we make the transition from the old to the new. And I send out newsletters. So please join our newsletter at the bottom of our webpage. You can sign up for it and climatehealers.org. And I send out newsletters every week. And I'll be coming to COP26 in Glasgow. And there I'm going to be sending out a podcast at least once a day.
Oh, brilliant news. That's great to see.
Yeah,
there are many hopes around COP26. And we'll see.
Oh, no, it's going to happen because to me, it's COP26. That to me is symbolic of 2026.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. It's your number. It's your target.
It's my number. It's my target. And it's
your
mine.
Your granddaughter's. Yeah.
My granddaughter, I'm going to claim it on behalf of my granddaughter and say, you're going to have to start talking about the cow in the room.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I will include links to all of those in the show notes below for people to click through. So, well, it's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much, Sailesh, for all of your work. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Same here, Jamie.
Take care.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.